Hi, I'm Tricia Perry for Vision of the Valley. Today we explore Poland Village, starting with the historic town hall. We'll also visit the site where a U.S. president spent part of his childhood, and we'll end here at the oldest building in Poland. So when people visit Poland and they aren't familiar with it and they glance over here and see this rolling green yard and this beautiful White House, they probably think, hey, is that where someone lives? And of course they did, but now we are so lucky to have it as the center of our village, right?
Exactly. Fortunately, in the old days it was a residence, of course, and it took in almost 9 acres of this property here, back to the football field and the American Legion building. But in the early 1960s, the village became interested in it when it became vacant and determined to buy it and convert it into a town hall. Beautiful building.
Easily it could have been lost. I mean, other houses have been lost here, which we'll talk about, but this could have been lost, but here it is preserved. Greek revival, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So tell me about who built it. The person who actually built this did not live here, right?
No, he was a man by the name of William Little, and I believe he constructed many homes in Poland. The first family to actually occupy the house was a family by the name of Stoddard, and they lived here for many years. Interesting story is that some of the Stoddard family got into the circus business, and when they tore down the old carriage house in the back of the building, in the basement they found the skeleton of a monkey who did not survive the winter here in Poland, Ohio.
Oh my.
But then over the years, the Stoddard family, of course, died out. The building became available in the 1920s or so, I believe it was, and a man by the name of Judge James B. Kennedy decided to buy the building. He was a prominent judge in the area and apparently had the finances to do a nice renovation of the building and maintain it until 1960s when the village decided to take it over and convert it into town hall. And
then this yard in front was not really quite like this. The gazebo was not there.
Gazebo was not there. That's a recent addition. We have concerts here on Monday evenings during the summertime. Occasionally, I guess there's a wedding here. They had a church service here on a Sunday not too long ago. So it's well used. And Farmers Market is here, or has been for so far this summer.
So it's really sort of good fortune that this was not lost. It could have been built up, it could have been torn down, and here we have the whole community can enjoy this space.
Exactly, and it's available for people to use for different events. Celebrate Poland holds their big annual event here over the weekend in June.
And inside you can find information on a walking tour if people want to come and just walk around and follow the path themselves.
Right, it talks about a lot of the older homes in Poland. The McKinley sisters lived here. Some of the early dormitory is over here, for example. A lot of historic history in Poland that we want to promote to people.
So looking at the town hall, you can tell that it used to be a residence, a nice, large residence, right?
Yes, it was. Judge James Kennedy lived here at one time and did a lot of redecorating. At one time also, this area over here, which is now a restroom for the handicapped, was the old jail cell that they had to remove, of course, to make the restroom. But it was moved here from up the street at the where the fire department is now, because that was the jail. You can see there's seating for somewhat of an audience, and the village council members sit up here with the mayor.
And there's still original fireplaces and somewhat the same
retains a lot of the old,
with a little bit, other than the jail, you know, what was the jail is now a restroom.
Exactly, that's been it. And of course there's an upstairs that used to be bedrooms, but now is used for offices.
Isn't it sort of nice that this is kind of the center of the community of Poland when there are activities and different things going on, plus plus council meetings,
Sure.
that people can actually come in and look at the building and enjoy it, as
Exactly.
well as doing their community business.
Right, as well as a nice exterior that we have with the gazebo and everything on the village property. Yes, it's open during the daytime. We have a secretary here who's on duty. Police chief has his office in here. So yeah, it's nice to have it available. And we have some historic pictures and things that have been donated to hang on the walls here.
So now it's about how many acreage, how much?
This is
acreage?
only about an acre, acre and a half now, because most of it was sold off for the football field and the American Legion building and the property there. So the Board of Education owns a lot of the property from the parking lot back to the creek, actually, Yellow Creek.
The creek is right to the side, a little ways over to the side of the building, and this is where business started in Poland.
Yeah. Poland Township is different from many of the townships that were started as part of the Connecticut Western Reserve. The townships are 5 square miles, and of course Poland was in Range 1 that runs north to south, and Town 1 which runs east to west. So we were the southeast corner. 1796 they did the survey. Most townships, the settlers would end up in the center of the township. In Poland, because of Yellow Creek being here, we are rather in the extreme western end of the township, because Boardman Township is just down the road here a little bit. So the creek attracted business, became a place of pleasure. It was the old swimming hole up and down the creek at various places. They used to ice skate on the creek in the wintertime. And Jonathan Fowler, who we'll talk about a lot today, he built the first grist mill on that mill on the creek.
So what you're saying is that many of the towns were laid out like a crossroads, and
Exactly.
there was a green on one side and a church and the main building, the township building on the other corner, and then maybe some commercial buildings. But Poland isn't like that.
Poland is not.
Easily we could not have had this lovely space in the middle of town for the community.
Exactly. And for a long time, well, for 20 years or so, our population in Poland was more than the city of Youngstown, because people were attracted here first because of the beauty and the location of the creek. And it was on the pathway from people coming from western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, on the way to the Western Reserve, Cleveland, and other areas, that they would go through Poland.
Mm-hmm. But those days of the mill, when did those end? When did it go?
There were actually 3 different mills. The first one was actually built by Jonathan Fowler, and it was out in the creek, just a little log building. They also then built a dam to take advantage of the water flow. And that was maybe 4 or 5 feet high. We have pictures of the old days of people standing on the top of the dam. Another mill burned down eventually, a third one replaced it, and then it was around 1920 that the third mill was removed completely. So we have a marker out there designating where the mill was, but it's no longer here, of course.
And then, you know, way before then, Youngstown started to be a much bigger city.
It started to grow, and eventually, of course, the railroads came in, and the creek wasn't such an advantage as it was in the early days.
But now it's an advantage to us because
It's
of
an advantage.
beauty.
We love it, yep.
So right here is where that old mill was, right by the creek.
Yeah, the first one, Jonathan Fowler, who was a very industrious young man when he first came to Poland here. In 1801, he constructed a log mill out in the center of the creek, I'm told, that you'd have to walk out to. And then eventually they built a dam down here on the creek, which made the water flow much better, because the mill couldn't be used all year. When the creek was low, they couldn't use it. But when it was high, it was a grist mill for flour and other things that they manufactured here.
So this has been here been put here to remember what was here.
Just to mark the site of the first grist mill.
Poland's industrial beginnings.
Exactly.
So now that Poland is embracing its history, part of that is to make sure that things that are lost are not forgotten.
Exactly.
And that's what you did here with the
That's
marker.
our goal. We want to preserve the past. So this past year, to recognize that McKinley lived here, we had a couple of events. We had a big birthday celebration January 29th right here in this area, because that's the birth date of William McKinley. Would have been his 170th birthday. Then we decided we wanted to apply for an Ohio historical marker through the Ohio Historical Society. It's a long application process. Every sentence on the marker has to have a footnote where you document where you found that information. And we were able to do that, submitted the application. Not only was it approved, but we were happy to find we got a $750 grant from the Ohio Historical Society. That, along with donations from other organizations in town, helped us finance the construction of the marker. So we had a big dedication ceremony here on June 29th of this year, and are happy to have the marker. Everybody who drives by now will recognize that McKinley lived here. This is the site of the original home back here, which is now the parking lot. There were grocery stores on this site for many years.
Like on the corner, was there a little store?
There was a store. Haynes and Cover had a grocery store there. Eventually people will remember Isley's was located here. And then, of course, it became a parking lot.
Yeah, and it's not the house, but it's good to remember that it was here.
Exactly. We talk about the fact that it was his boyhood home, and we mean the village was his home, not just the house that used to stand here. But he enjoyed everything here. They were very active in the Methodist Church just up the street at that time. So they really took a big part in the role of the village at that time.
So visitors to Poland, people who live in Poland, can walk the streets where he was always when he was a child.
And remember that a president of the United States once roamed these grounds.
So this is, I believe, one of the oldest buildings in Poland, right?
I believe it probably is the oldest building in Poland, especially a commercial building. Jonathan Fowler, who was Turhan Kirtland's brother-in-law, came here in 1799, if you can believe that, and first lived on a little place on the creek, just a temporary quarters, built a small log home there. But then by 1804, he had constructed this huge stone tavern. It became a tavern over the years. Very industrious man, had a lot of ambition, unfortunately had a sad ending that I'll tell you about a little bit later. But yes, this was the old stone tavern. People would travel from the Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania area into Ohio and would stay here overnight. The downstairs part was primarily a tavern, gathering place, and then there were sleeping rooms upstairs for people to stay. In fact, in the early days, Poland was called Fowler or Fowlers because this was the only business or place in town that people knew of in those days.
So it probably went hand in hand with having a mill right down there.
Sure, he had built a mill already, so he was a very enterprising young man and got a lot of things started here in Poland.
So then did it ever become just a residence? Or was it always
Yes,
a
there were
business?
sometimes over the years where it did become a residence. It served many purposes. It's been a tea room at times, it's been a restaurant at times, and primarily an antique store because it just fits for this type of building to have antiques here.
So tell us about Fowler's that end. You must
Well,
have.
Jonathan Fowler, as I said, very industrious man. He got into an agreement with some gentlemen, a man by the name of Dean, had come to the Mahoning River area down in Struthers, and he contracted with some gentlemen to cut down some huge logs that he was going to use to build rafts. So after several months, they had 33 of these long 110-foot logs, 15 inches diameter, and they were going to float them down the Mahoning River to the Beaver River, to the Ohio River, and eventually to New Orleans, believe it or not. They were also floating along with them casks, barrel casks, to be used, apparently to be taken to the Madeira Islands, is what we're told. Now, Jonathan Fowler went up and down the creek and the rivers many times, bringing goods back and forth to the tavern for sale here. He contracted to help transport these logs down the creek. Unfortunately, over near Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, there's a place called Hard Scrabble, and he capsized, his canoe capsized, and he drowned there in 1806. and he is buried in the old cemetery next to the Presbyterian church here.
It's only 7 years after he came here.
Yeah, he was only 42 years old, I believe, so he got a lot done while he was alive, but unfortunately did not live very long once he did get here. His family, of course, was left pretty much destitute because in addition to having this building and the goods inside, he also had a lot of debts. I found an inventory of his estate on Trumbull County records because Mahoning was part of Trumbull until 1846. And yeah, he had a lot of debts, so that, unfortunately the family wasn't left with much when he died.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
So now, as I recall when I was a child, this building was really not used as a commercial building. There wasn't much going on in here to go in and out of.
A lot of years it wasn't used for anything. It was a residence for a while sometimes, but it's, yes, as I said, many purposes.
And now it's one of those buildings that we can walk in and enjoy and look around and see a little bit of what Poland used to be like.
Gives you a reminder of what things were like back in those days.
It's a great building. I mean, it's a great example of that period of architecture.
To have held up over that many years since 1804 is just amazing to me, the size of the building.
So we talked about McKinley and his boyhood home. He's actually linked to this building as well. Tell us about that.
Exactly. Well, in April 1861, Fort Sumter was fired upon, and that was, of course, the start of the Civil War. A man by the name of Charles Glidden, who was a local attorney, gave a rousing speech on the porch of this old stone tavern, and many men at that time decided to sign up to go off to the Civil War. This would have been in April 1861. They eventually trained here for a little while and left for Camp Chase in Columbus in June. William McKinley and his cousin, William Osborne, were also at this event, and they heard the speech. However, they were a little reluctant to sign up with the other men right away. They wanted to consult with their parents. The whole community turned out in June to follow these recruits as they went off to the Civil War. They went to the train station in Youngstown. McKinley and his cousin Osborne went along. On the way back, they got to talking, saying, you know, we really should be going too. They were both named William, by the way. So they decided to talk to their parents about it, and the parents finally did agree. So just a couple days later, they went off to war too. But all of these men signed up for enlistment on the steps of the Old Stone Tavern here.
That's wonderful. That's a great piece of history.
It is.
Besides the fact that he lived here as a child, that he made such a big decision here. Yeah, big decision.
There's at least a legend, if not more so, that this served as one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. We know that other places in Poland did, but the story is that under the bridge at Yellow Creek, there was an entranceway that the runaways could enter and find their way up to the basement of this Old Stone Tavern and stash away here until it was safe to leave and to go on up north to Warren, Cleveland, and other areas.
But there's no proof of that anywhere.
Unfortunately, there is no proof.
Because really they didn't keep records of that.
Right, it was all secret,
yeah.
so there weren't going to be any records.
So have you ever heard the stories that it might be a little bit haunted here?
You hear stories about most old buildings like that, yes.
Mm-hmm. Like cold spaces and warm spaces. I've heard some people tell stories about this, that you might hit a draft that seems extra cold or extra warm.
Some ghosts from the old days around, maybe Jonathan Fowler.
So this porch actually extended across the whole building at one time.
Yes, actually both levels went clear across the whole building.
Which was perfect for an inn or for, the lack of air conditioning. They needed porches. And then you can really see the stone structure, the construction over here on the side, and the double chimneys.
It's hard for me to imagine how back in 1804 Jonathan Fowler was able to build this building. The stones, I understand, were brought here from the creek bed. And you can see the stars through the building on the outside.
Like these stars right up here above the window?
Yeah. Supposedly there are cables that run through the floorboards that kind of pull the building together because it was bowing out a little bit on the sides.
Yeah, you can see it kind of curves out a little bit.
It still does somewhat, yes.
So that keeps it all together.
It's
Make sure
holding it
those
together
stones
for
don't
now.
fall
We
out.
hope for a long time to come.
We are hoping.
Yes.
So this is quite a treasure for our community.
Definitely is, yes, something unique for Poland. As you can see, it's still a business today and being operated in.
And then this would be maybe where, if it's true, the Underground Railroad connected.
Sure, this door would lead down into the basement, and of course it would have been bricked over or stoned over at that time. But down in the basements, apparently there was an opening where the runaway slaves were taken from the creek bed.
Right, which makes sense because, you know, that would be a way out and this would be a place to hide.
Exactly.
So if you have that bug to explore, consider Poland, Ohio, a place with a lot of history and a little bit of mystery. For Vision of the Valley, I'm Tricia Perry.